never good news when your phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning, especially if you're the parent of a newborn baby in hospital. As parents, or as expectant parents, we all write stories for our children. And those stories all have happy endings. Initially, we are the authors of our children's stories. Eventually, they write their own story. But in the first part of their lives, our only job as parents is to protect our children. But for some parents, that job's taken away from them. Their child's born too early, too small, or too sick. It's never good news when your phone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's also never good news if you meet me at 3 o'clock in the morning. My name's Craig McBride, and I'm a pediatric surgeon. And if you meet me at 3 o'clock in the morning, it means that your child needs an operation. And the story that you've written for your child is about to change. The happy ending that you were expecting might not be a happy ending. And you are no longer the author of your child's story. As a parent, your only job is to protect your child. That's my job too. But you have to decide right now to let me be one of the authors of your child's story. There's a concept that we learn at medical school. First of all, do no harm, primum non nocere, primum non nocere, depending on if your Latin is medieval or classical. But I'm a surgeon, and I do no harm because I operate on children. And there's a controlled trauma to surgery that harms children with the intention of making them better. Some of the children that I operate on are so small and so sick that they can't be moved from where they're lying. And just touching those children causes their heart rate to fall and their breathing to settle or stop. This child weighs 500 grams. That's my hand. And that child needs an operation because the bacteria that are living in their bowel have migrated through the wall of the bowel, and the bowel has perforated inside the abdomen. Anything I do can cause trauma to that child, but if I don't do anything, that child's struggle to survive might end. I can introduce infection by operating. I can cause bleeding by operating, and the circulating blood volume of this child is 3 tablespoons. In medical speak, that's a short black. I do no harm. So primum non nocere, first of all, do no harm, doesn't kind of work for surgeons. Instead, we seek to minimise harm, and there are 3 ways that we do that. All surgeons know how to operate. Good surgeons know when to operate, but the best surgeons know when not to operate. I work in the children's burns unit, and we see 1,300 children a year with a new burn. Some of those burns need a skin graft, but a skin graft creates a wound, which is the donor site, where I harvest skin to place on the burn. If I can avoid operating and treat and heal that burn, then I have minimised harm. When I started as a surgeon, about 10% of all the children that we were seeing would require a skin graft, and we see 1,300 children a year. That's 130 children that require a skin graft. With proper first aid, 20 minutes of cold running water, my message to you this evening, we can decrease the chances that those children will need a skin graft. With proper burns dressings, we can decrease the chances that those children will need a skin graft. With proper pain relief, we can decrease the chances that those children will need a skin graft. And now, from 10% 10 years ago, we're now grafting just over 2% of all the children that we see with a burn. We've gone from 130 children a year to less than 30 needing a skin graft. We can minimise harm by not operating. That's the first way. The second way we can minimise harm is by minimising the operation. It takes a lot of effort to make something look simple. But there is a beauty in that simplicity. There is a condition that occurs in childhood at about the 3rd or 4th week of age called pyloric stenosis, where the outlet to the stomach becomes thickened such that food that the baby drinks or milk that the baby drinks can't pass through the stomach, and children start to vomit. And by vomiting, I don't mean a little spill on the back of the shirt that all parents eventually wear as a badge of honour. I mean a vomit that clears the room and hits the wall because the outlet of the stomach is blocked. Without an operation, before 1900, pyloric stenosis had a mortality of 100%. And then between 1900 and 1911, some very brave surgeons and some even braver parents allowed their children to be operated on. And initially, the operations were incredibly invasive. Surgeons would resect the pylorus. They would actually remove that part of the stomach and join the two ends back together again. And for a lot of those children, because they were so small and so malnourished, that joint would leak and children would die. Quite apart from the trauma of removing that part of the stomach, which is an area of the body that has a very large blood supply. And then in the first decade of the 1900s, surgeons reasoned, well, we don't have to remove it. Maybe we can just split it and then sew it back together the other way, and that will relieve the obstruction. And it does. But you're still opening the stomach and risking leakage. And then a few years after that, people said, well, we don't have to actually split it all the way because the problem is the muscle. So if we split the muscle and leave the lining behind, then we don't risk a leak and sepsis and death. We can take our operation and minimise it. And then in 1911, Conrad Ramstedt said, well, we don't actually even have to stitch it back together again. We can just split the muscle and that will relieve the blockage. So we take an operation that works and we subtract from it and we make it simpler and we take the beauty in that simplicity. And since 1911, that operation is unchanged. That's the operation that I do today. That's the operation I did yesterday. That's the second way we can minimise harm. This is Dan McPherson, and I'm grateful to him for allowing me to use this picture, and to Gina who took the picture. He has a pyloromyotomy scar across his abdomen, and I'm really envious of the surgeon who managed to make that incision exactly where his six-pack lies. But in getting to the pylorus, I have to transgress normal tissue. So if I can minimise the approach, then I can minimise the trauma that I cause to normal tissue on my way to the target. And that's the third way that I can minimise harm. So nowadays, when we do a pyloromyotomy, instead of making an incision in the abdomen, I make a little incision underneath the umbilicus and then pass instruments into the abdomen that are 3 millimetres in diameter. And this is what it looks like. The reddy brown thing's the liver, and the thing that's being poked is the pylorus, which is thickened at the outlet of the stomach. And one of my trainees is now grasping the pylorus and then incising the muscle using cauterizing diathermy. This is in real time and it's not sped up. And then having cauterized that muscle through 2 3 millimetre incisions and a 5 millimetre incision at the umbilicus, we can then split the muscle, which you'll see shortly, and allow the mucosa to pout through, thus relieving the obstruction. So the spreader comes in and splits the muscle. And shortly you'll see the mucosa bulging forward, showing us that we've relieved the obstruction. That's the same operation that was described by Conrad Ramstedt in 1911. We've minimised the operation, but nowadays we've also minimised the approach. So it's not about, first of all, do no harm, because surgery is harmful. And we have to recognise that. Instead, it's about do as little harm as possible, so that the stories that you write for your children, you can continue to write, and they will have a happy ending. We spend more and more of our time thinking about how we can do less and less as surgeons. Good surgery is not about more and more. It's about less and less, because in paediatric surgery, less really is more.